Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game So taking our long-running series, the Unported Playlist, where I take a list of my favorite unported arcade games of all time. And today I have a treat for you guys because we are playing Brave Firefighters. I did a video on this maybe over 2-3 years ago saying that even though you could play it on Sega Hikaru emulation in Demul, you had to go one very specific route so it wouldn't freeze, and there was an absolute metric ton of graphical corruption. Now with the most recent version of Demul, you can play the game from start to finish, and even though there might be a little bit of visual weirdness every once in a while, I would say this game is like 95% feeling like perfect emulation. And if you've never heard of this game before, if you ever see it in arcades, throw a bunch of money into it and beat it, because this cabinet is incredibly rare and you'll probably never see one again. Before you get too far involved though, do me a huge favor down below, hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, I got a Patreon link down below as well. But Brave Firefighters is basically what happens if you take the formula of House of the Dead or House of the Dead 2 and turn it into a firefighting game, not a zombie shooting game. And that is because this basically uses the same like-kind mechanic of any other game, except in this instance your enemy is going to be the fire in and of itself. And this is one of the few Hikaru games I've actually played in person. I think it was on the Nevada side of Lake Tahoe at a casino that we went to after a ski shoot. I saw a cabinet for this, and I put a bunch of money in and played it because I knew it existed, but I had never gotten a chance to check it out before. And that is because, at least if you believe gaming magazines back in the day, this was supposed to be ported over to Dreamcast along with Emergency Call Ambulance and Jambo Safari as some sort of trilogy work collection, where you did 3 basic quote-unquote jobs, and that was the entire gameplay loop. Now in Brave Firefighters, you get basically what amounts to a real job, which is fighting a fire, and even though obviously this isn't what it would be like in real life, at least I would assume, it is pretty realistic, where the other two, Emergency Call Ambulance has you driving an ambulance through Chicago like an absolute maniac, and Jambo Safari has you catching different safari animals with a lasso, kind of like you're a cowboy trying to rope a steer. So Brave Firefighters definitely wins as far as the realism is concerned. But this game is basically why, at least as Sega states, they created the Sega Hikaru hardware in the first place. They had an idea for a game featuring all of this different fire, but they didn't really have the hardware that was able to actually run it the way they wanted to. And that, at least if you believe what you hear on the internet, what Sega stated in the past, is the entire reason for Hikaru's existence in the first place. Because this is kind of the concept of a Dreamcast stapled together with the concept of a brand new board. Because the GPU side of things on Hikaru is completely different than what you see on something like Dreamcast or NAOMI, but it is still using the Hitachi SH4 CPUs. And this is definitely something that gave a good look, although it really is hard to say that it was that much more impressive than something like NAOMI in actual practice. And if you haven't heard me mention Hikaru before, I will tell you one more time. This hardware is absolutely some of the most delicate stuff ever made, and that is down to the fact that at the factory, they made an engineering mistake. Basically, all of the different chips, the ball grid array chips on the board, will pop off if the board even so much as suffers a slight rattle. That is because they did put the balls, the solder balls in fact, on the chips, but they didn't tin the pads on the actual PCB. Both should have had solder before they were joined, and because one side was missing it, it gets a worse bond as far as the mechanical bond is concerned, and any sort of shock impact, and those chips just absolutely fly off the boards. And even though you could reball them, basically nobody does that for Hikaru. Even people that repair Sega hardware for kind of a hobby living do not like to work on Hikaru unless it's a local pickup only, because even after you fix it, odds are if you try to ship the damn thing, those chips are going to pop off the motherboard again. That means that these games are incredibly rare as working examples, and if you wanted to buy a Brave Firefighters PCB today, you can't. I've looked, there is no one for sale, and that is because I'm still trying to find one myself. So having this work in the new test version of Demul is amazing, because it means this game will be available to play for all time. Is the emulation perfect? No, it is not. Would you really notice if I didn't point it out? Probably not. But let's move into the first soundtrack sample as well, so you can get an idea of what Hikaru sounded like, and I'll be right back with a lot more.
Team A1, we're in the living room on the 2nd floor. Found Mayor Taylor, but couldn't get him to come with us. Looks like he went to the restaurant in Area G. We're going to go after him and continue on the 2nd floor. Go! There's someone over there! Move it!
Now, I don't know how Sega managed to accomplish what you just heard there, but it is one of the only games from this era of Sega voiceover acting that isn't absolutely complete garbage. I'm not saying it's any sort of good acting either, but it's at least kind of contextual for the game you're playing, and the people that are delivering the lines don't feel like they're phoning it in with absolutely no direction whatsoever, so that is impressive in that own fact. But as we get further into the game, you can just see how technically complicated Hikaru hardware is and why it is definitely one of Sega's more powerful boards of that era, because you had Dreamcast NAOMI, then you had Hikaru and NAOMI 2, and that is the end of the run for real Sega hardware, because after that they basically start working on Xbox hardware for the arcades. They go over to the Triforce with Nintendo and Namco on the actual GameCube hardware. So Hikaru basically means this is one of the last stops for Sega's internal hardware development, along with NAOMI 2, before they basically give up on developing hardware completely and just basically use everyone else's hardware. And that makes me love this hardware in game even more, because if you know me and you know the channel, you know I love custom bespoke silicon for 3D arcade games, especially stuff that look better than we had at home. Now here is the thing, this definitely could have been accomplished on Dreamcast. My assumption would be that you would have a little bit of a lesser convincing flame effect, but there's nothing in the geometry here, at least to my eye, that makes me think that this wouldn't be able to run on Dreamcast hardware. And that is kind of the real question about Hikaru. Sega always loved developing new arcade hardware, and I'm glad that Hikaru exists, but because they had the NAOMI basically on arcade floors as well, it really kind of begs the question what Sega was doing developing another board, because the Hikaru didn't get anywhere near as many games as the NAOMI. We're basically under 10 on Hikaru versus NAOMI, which I think has over 150 at this point in time, but I am using my memory here. Sega could have easily done something like this on their existing hardware, and that would have been basically a quote-unquote free port back home to the Dreamcast, but I'm glad Sega's engineers decided, hey, let's push a little bit further and see what we can do on Hikaru, almost making you wonder if Sega was planning a Dreamcast 2, maybe something about the Hikaru architecture or what they learned from it would have been useful at the home, because this is one of the first boards ever to use Phong shading. I believe it is the first, but trying to track down those details can be quite difficult. It is almost impossible to verify it, so I'll say probably the first arcade board to use Phong shading, but there might be some example out there that I just don't remember. And that is why, again, having these games being able to be emulated makes such a big difference, because if these things didn't work under emulation, they'd basically be lost games, because I am not aware of any cabinet for Brave Firefighters in North America. And like I always like to ask, and you guys always surprise me, if you do know where there is a cabinet for this game, leave me a comment down below, because this is the type of thing I want to play it on real hardware again, and if I can ever find a PCB to buy, I will 100% do it and capture footage for the channel. Let's do soundtrack sample 2, because again, relatively good voice acting, and I'll be right back.
Help me!
Are you alright?
The hall suddenly started to burn! The mayor's family are still upstairs!
Okay, upstairs. Can't use the elevator, it's too dangerous. Let's go.
I think the really interesting thing about Brave Firefighters, outside of the fact of its kind of very custom hardware, is the fact that Sega had big plans for Brave Firefighters, Jambo Safari, and Emergency Call Ambulance when it came to actually bringing these over to the Dreamcast, and every single one of those games never actually saw a home port. And trust me, Jambo Safari on the Wii, not the same game you're thinking of, it is the same game by title, but in gameplay it is completely different. And they just basically were never able to bring these things actually home. And you have one game that runs on the Sega NAOMI, you have one game that runs on the Sega Model 3, and you have one game that runs on the Hikaru. So 3 different games that were all supposed to be part of the same trilogy of games on Dreamcast across 3 different pieces of hardware, and Sega just couldn't get the job done for any of them. And that again is a bummer. But I always love Sega because they're always experimenting. A firefighting game in arcades definitely doesn't sound like on paper it would be a success, and I can't find any evidence online that it in fact was actually successful. Just so you know, there is a very special version of this game that was made and seems to be completely lost to time as far as a ROM dump is concerned, where they basically pivoted this up more to be a public safety game than an actual arcade game. There is one playthrough on Nico Nico Video, which I would link down below, but every time you do a link to a different platform that actually has streaming video, YouTube absolutely just crushes much as you as far as the reach is concerned, so I won't be doing that here, but if you know me on Discord or Twitter, just message me and I'll send you that link. But Brave Firefighters is just Sega really experimenting as to what they could do in arcades, both as hardware and as software. And honestly, I really do love the look of the Hikaru. It has a nice high resolution, it has some really good models to it, and a lot of fun effects, but obviously, watching this here, you realize to yourself, it really isn't anything that Dreamcast couldn't pull off with some changes, or that NAOMI 2 couldn't absolutely chew through. But it's fun that these games are saved for all time. That means whoever wants to play Brave Firefighters in the future will have the most recent version of Demul to be able to do that, and that makes all the difference in the world, because again, the games on these boards, stuff like Planet Harriers, Brave Firefighters, Virtual On, Air Tricks, absolutely basically extinct at this point in time. The Star Wars game and the NASCAR game you might still see out there every once in a while because they were popular, but we're done. I'm going to keep on fighting this fire, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.